Welcome to the very first episode of Conversational Pace, a podcast for ordinary runners. I'm Chris Barrett.
And I'm Jim Atkins. We start this podcast to help regular runners avoid some of the pitfalls that we've run into in our day-to-day running journeys. I guess we'll start off with our backgrounds in running and how we got into things. I've been running for roughly 6 years now. My running journey started back in 2017. I've been morbidly obese the majority of my life and lost a lot of weight back in 2009 before I got married. Put a lot of the weight back on and really wanted to find a way to keep it off the second time around. So I picked up running as a way to do that. Became a lot larger part of my life than I would have ever guessed. I ran my first 5K after 3 months of training. And then I pretty quickly moved to the 10K distance and kind of sat there for a while. I did a half marathon, but then went back to the 5K distance after that. I ran 2 10Ks roughly 6 months after that, and then signed up for a half marathon the following year. Really didn't have any interest in the marathon until later on. It took me 3 or 4 years to feel comfortable to give that a try. Tried my first marathon, DNF'd that, which, did not finish. It was a big mental hurdle to overcome. Then hit my next one, which was Chicago in 2021. Also DNF'd that. So I was off to a great start with my marathons. And that's kind of why we wanted to start this podcast, was just those kind of things to find out how you keep going with something like that. Because I did come back in 2022 and complete my first marathon, which was a trail marathon. Way more difficult, way more challenging, but I did overcome that obstacle and finally complete that goal. And then in 2022, I also did my first 50K on the road, which is a huge achievement as well. It was 5 years in, I went from not running at all to a 5K to a 50K. I think Chris has been a little bit faster than that, probably because of my help, but he'll go into his background now.
I've always enjoyed running throughout my life, just for play as a kid. And then in high school and gym class, I really felt like I enjoyed the running parts of that too. In fact, somewhere around my sophomore, junior year, I kind of wanted to join the cross-country team at our high school. And my sister went as far as to call the coach and try and get things rolling for me. But I was really shy back then and felt really awkward about even going and contacting anyone about getting something like that going. So I never followed through, and I've always kind of regretted that. Also, throughout my life, I've intermittently tried to get back into running. I would go out for a run around my block or something, not really having any idea what I was doing. And I always felt sort of embarrassed about that. Like, is anybody looking at me? Do I look stupid? Of course I look stupid. And so it really kind of never took until finally, just shy of a couple of years ago, I thought I'd get back into it. And I think I was really sort of helped out with all of the data that was involved and all the gadgets so that I could see my progress. And so it finally took root. And I went out for my first run and I ran solid for about 1.54 miles at a pace of about 13 and a half minutes, which, is fairly slow. And at the end of that, I was just dying. And as much as I hated it, I would really look forward to the next opportunity to go out and do better. I started doing a little more research about running and then found out that the way that a lot of people recommend that you get started is to do a run-walk method that was pioneered by Coach Jeff Galloway. And the idea of that is that you go out and do a half hour running what you can and walking what you can. So you may start out with a ratio of half and half, 5 minutes walking, 5 minutes running, and then each next run try to progress from there. So that's what I did. And within, 4 or 5 runs, I got to the point of actually being able to run for a solid half hour. And at that point, I was probably running too fast. I still didn't know much at all about what I was doing, but I was getting out there and doing runs. And I think about 4 or 5 months later, I signed up for my first 5K and had the goal of running that sub 30 and actually came in at 29:53. So just a few seconds under my sub 30 goal at a 9:36 pace, and felt really excited and really pumped and motivated about that. Went out to the car, changed back into dry clothes, and promptly locked my keys in my car. And that was kind of like the big finish to my first race, my introduction to running competitively. Fortunately, about an hour or so later, my wife came out to rescue me. And later on, when we were back home, she mentioned, well, maybe someday you'll do a marathon. And exactly 10 months later, I did just that, running Grandma's Marathon in Duluth at about 4 hours 21, which was right about where I wanted to do it. And it was pretty great for I don't know, 18 to 20 miles. And then it really sucked for 3 or 4 miles. And then it was sort of okay for the remainder. And definitely the hardest thing I've ever done. But still, I knew that I was going to get right back into it. I was excited for Chicago coming up a few months later. That's sort of my intro. One of the things we thought we should do in this very first episode, now that we've given you some background on how we've gotten into running, is to start to help others get into running. So you might wonder, how do I get out there and put one foot in front of the other? What do I need to do? And there's lots of programs that can help you do that. Jim, what have you looked into for those sort of things when you were getting going?
Well, when I started, the biggest thing, and you mentioned it in passing there, was the embarrassment of running, being seen in public running. I started on a treadmill and I didn't want to be seen running. I didn't have one of the programs set up, the Couch to 5K, but I did a similar method like you did, where it was I ran for 1/10 of a mile and then I would walk for 1/10 of a mile on the treadmill. I had no natural running ability. I was much heavier when I started. I was 280 pounds. So that's a pretty big frame for a runner. And I found it easiest just to run as hard as I could for 1/10 of a mile and then walk for 1/10 of a mile. And slowly I progressed where I could run 1/4 of a mile and then walk 1/10 of a mile. Then I got up to a 1/2 a mile run with a 1/10 of a mile walk until I finally hit that milestone. I could run a few miles straight. It wasn't fast and it definitely wasn't pretty, but I was doing it. I did find that when I moved from the treadmill out to the road, it was a completely different experience. And I kind of had to take 2 steps back and start with the 1/2 a mile run again and 1/10 a mile walk. But eventually I worked my way back up and was able to hit 3 miles straight run. And at my first 5K, I was not as fast as Chris. I was at 32 minutes, but I was super proud of that run after building that base from literally nothing in 3 months to being able to run the whole entire race of the 5K.
And so as tough as it can be to get motivated and get out there to do it, you just have to take a step outside your door. And I think one of the other big things really is, building this into a habit, creating consistency. A number of the times that I failed at trying to become a runner was when I would go run one day and then think about when I should run next and kind of forget about it and then get back out maybe a few days later and then do maybe another run on the weekend and have no plan in place. So I think that when you don't have some structure to what you want to do with your life, it's easy to give up on goals and aspirations. Did you use a lot of consistency in your early days, or how did that work out?
I tried to, and unfortunately, my run schedule went from nights where it just didn't work for me. And once I hit that consistent, I'm going to run in the morning and make it happen before work, that's when it really snapped into focus for me. I don't know if that's what motivated you to get going and how you overcame everything. Mine was get it done before work. You have no excuses. You start your day off on the right foot, and you really formed a habit after that. That was just part of my day. I was going to wake up and I was going to go run.
Cool. I think another thing that can really help out new runners is to find a running buddy. Find people that you really sync and gel with. Because I know there have been a number of times when I've needed to get out for a run and I really didn't feel like doing it, but I knew that, Jim or someone else is going to meet me out there. And so they held me accountable. And that's what kept me consistent over the length of my training. Also, just having training plan itself is something that can begin to hold you accountable. But really, on top of that, having someone else to run with helps, push you and helps you be more consistent, I think.
The structure of a training plan will definitely help keep you accountable. If you just go out there and you try to wing it, it's really hard to stay motivated with no set schedule, no goal to hit. That's another thing that'll help keep you motivated. Sign up for an event. Get that first 5K, that target date. You've got it in the books then. It's something you're working for. Another thing that helps keep me motivated outside human companionship is I have a dog, and he will make you feel guilty for staying in bed and not going out for a run with him. And sometimes that's all the motivation you need is a little guilt, a little extra push to get out that door.
Yeah, I think that was a really good point about signing up for something. As soon as you get your running off the ground, find a 5K near you and, just go ahead and sign up for it. And then okay, I've got to do this. I've got to be out there and I've got to make myself ready. And then you get yourself a training plan. And there's tons of stuff out there. All you need to do is Google Couch to 5K. And that'll get you a good beginner's plan to get you ready for a 5K. And that's really the gateway race. That's what gets us all hooked. That's great to get out there and just get into the race because it's pretty exciting. Jim and I have done a number of races together, and there's so much adrenaline right at the beginning. There have been so many times where I thought we were going to go out and be sensible and take it easy. And either Jim will push the pace or I will. And sometimes it's a mistake, and sometimes we end up with PRs. So the race can do a lot for you as far as motivation. And then, it kind of gets you really excited about maintaining your running and getting back to it and signing up for the next race.
Yeah, and that's 100% true. If we were to put up one of those times from our early races nowadays, we wouldn't be too happy or proud of it. But there's a sense of pride that was our first race. You hit that goal. And then you go to the next race. Even if it's the same distance, I'm going to shave 2 minutes off my time. I'm going to do a 10K instead next time. There's limitless options when it comes to setting your next goal and keeping yourself motivated for running. And that's one of the beautiful things about the sport is there's no one direction. There's no right path for everybody. If you want to just do 5Ks for the rest of your life and you're happy doing a 32-minute 5K like I did my first time, that's awesome. 32 minutes might be somebody's goal, and that's an awesome goal to aim for. That's something to strive for and something to keep you motivated. Maybe you don't have a goal at all. You just want to finish and get the medal. That's a perfect goal too, just to keep you running every day. It's just a great thing to keep you motivated and have some structure in your life and to keep you healthy. And it's just so easy to get help. There's a lot of supportive people, back of the packers, middle of the packers like Chris and I, who are out there ready to give advice, and they want to be a positive part of the community.
Yeah, I think that's right. There's a lot of positive input that you get from your peers when you're out there, even like strangers when you're in a race. People that you don't know and have no vested interest in you will give you a lot of support along the way, whether they're spectators or other runners. And I feel that in races, and it gives me a lot of energy and a lot of motivation to keep going. And another great point that you brought up was about having what you might or might not hit as your goals. So for my first marathon, I just wanted to be able to finish it, and I pretty much met my time goal. And then for the second one, I really wanted to shave a lot of time off of that and finish in sub 4 hours. And now I've kind of reassessed all of my goals because I did terrible by my own calculations at that marathon. I mean, I still finished it and it was a little slower than my previous. But now I'm less focused on hitting specific goals. And I'd really like to just be able to run a solid marathon, because in the 3 long distance races I've done, marathons and ultra, there have been portions where I had to do a lot of walking because I was in so much pain and my spirits were so down. So now my A goal for a long distance run is just to keep it moving. So I think that you're going to have expectations and goals as a new runner that you'll set for yourself. And the process is really going to inform you, and your body's going to let you know that those may not be the best goals for you at this time. And you'll have to reassess and rethink about what's going to work for you and what's going to keep you excited and motivated about the sport. And that all comes with time and experience, really.
So I think we just said in a really long way, make sure your goal is a realistic one. If you're not running at all, maybe don't sign up for that marathon. Don't register for Chicago quite yet. Let's start small with a 5K with a realistic goal. If you're not running at all, maybe sub 40 is a good goal. Maybe no time goal, just to finish and have a good time. The other thing that Chris said that I want to touch on, people that you'll meet along the way of the race, some of the most supportive people I have on social media and Strava, I've never really spent a meaningful amount of time with in real life. It's just somebody I ran 2 to 5 miles with at a random race, and we started following each other on Strava or Instagram. And those are some of the most supportive people you can have, is just a running random stranger. They don't judge you. They don't care what's happening in the day to day. They just give you that thumbs up on Strava, the heart on Instagram, and to let you know that you're being supported even virtually. It does mean a lot at the end of the day. And that's kind of the positive side of the running community I was talking about, is just that support system that is out there, even within strangers and somebody that you just spent a few miserable miles with at your last marathon, at a 10K that you blew up on, and you were just walking on the side of the road and they kind of stopped and checked to make sure you were okay. Those are some of the bright moments in running that you will experience when you choose to take this journey.
Yeah, I think one of the real benefits for me is that, throughout life, I think I've been kind of a cynic, and especially with political divides in recent times, I sort of lost a lot of my faith in society and humanity. And I feel like running has been restoring more and more of that, because I see so much good out there. And it makes me believe in our own human spirits, as the things that we can overcome and the things that we can do. I never would have thought that I would have run a marathon, let alone 3 in the first year that I did it. And it really makes you realize what we can accomplish if we really set our will to it. So as you've picked up on by this point, the title of the podcast is Conversational Pace. And I'll take a moment to define that. What it means is doing a run, typically a training run, at a slow enough rate that allows you to actually talk to a running partner or just talk to yourself if you're alone. And this means not, getting out a word or a phrase and then gasping for breath. It means running slow enough that you can actually hold a conversation without straining yourself. And so for some people, especially beginners, this is going to be a really light jog or sometimes a fast walk. But what conversational pace does is it allows you to build up your endurance and your aerobic capacity without overtaxing the body, without pushing yourself and without injuring yourself. And a lot of coaches will, kind of gear people towards doing this for 80% of their running volume. And first year that I was out there running, I was on Strava and I got in my own head a lot. And Jim and I talk about this a lot, how we push ourselves too much because of ego. And so we end up developing slower because we're not running smart. I looked at my paces for last year recently because I was wondering, why do I feel so good this year? And how come I don't have the injuries I had last year? And the answer is I'm running slower. I think I could still run a race as fast as I did last year at this point, or maybe soon. But I feel much healthier and much stronger than I did last year. And that's just because I went out and ran too fast every time I did a training run last year. And both Jim and I, especially like when we run together, have been really challenged with slowing our runs down and finding that benefit.
It's really easy to lose yourself in a pace, in a conversation, and not pay attention and just get back to what is basically your natural cadence of your body. You check your watch and suddenly you're a minute faster than you want it to be for this recovery run. That is one of the hardest things I've had to come to terms with and deal with. My first 3 years of running, I never used any kind of online resources, any training plans. I just made up everything as I went, and it worked for me. I was getting results. I was finishing races, and I was hitting my goal times. The problem is I wasn't ever going to get any better, any faster. I wasn't going to be able to do anything really longer than a half marathon because I was just running at my top tier pace 90% of the time. I'd have my runs where I was hurt and I was banged up and I was kind of limping along. And that was almost a forced recovery run for my body. And that's a hard thing to overcome, especially when you do join something like Strava or you have your friend's feed on Garmin or your Apple Watch or whatever the case may be. You can see, I can run the same, half marathon pace as this person, or I've hung with them for an entire 5K, and you see them running 8-minute miles, 7-minute miles for a training run. You're tempted to try to push the pace to prove something. And it's kind of a big pill to swallow, especially for a beginner runner, that these training runs aren't to prove something. They're training. You're training your body to be able to do more. You're supposed to peak at your race. You're not supposed to be peaking during training. You shouldn't be hitting PRs on an easy training run. You should be chatting with your buddy, your run group, focused on music and slowed down. You're not supposed to be going all out and coming back from a 5K recovery run feeling like, well, that's it for the day because I just overtaxed my entire system. So that's a big beginner's misstep that if you don't really put some thought into it, can become a pitfall. And Chris and I have both experienced that, me for a much longer time than Chris, that we were just going too fast. And with the information available, there's so many resources and data points now that you can actually see that and find out, wow, my heart rate was way too high for that run that was supposed to be at an easy pace. Or did I really feel like I could maintain what I was just doing now for a marathon pace? Because a lot of your training runs will call for do this at 5K pace, do this at race pace, do this at marathon pace. And if you're running much faster than that, you're not training for anything. It's just junk miles at that point. It's just garbage miles you're putting on your body and doing damage to your muscles for no real reason.
You're right. And I think also training smart requires a lot of faith in your plan, faith in a coach if you have one, faith in yourself to perform at the levels you want to when you need to. And there's, this pitfall that, a lot of new runners fall into is that you get out there and maybe you'll have a bad run and you'll feel like, I'm not that good. I'm not that fast. What's going on with me? I'm having a bad day. Maybe I should just quit. And then, so maybe like the next run out, you really push for a PR so that you can, sort of legitimize yourself as a runner. And so, yeah, my first year out there was a string of PRs One, because I was getting more conditioning and being able to go faster and faster. But I really kept falling into this mental trap of feeling like I wasn't as good as I wanted to be and not as good as the next runner and really doubting myself. And it would be easy to like miss a few days running and then just wonder, have I lost it all? Am I even a runner at this point? So then I would go out there and run really hard, which was just stupid. And, I would get a PR and I would see it and it would be on Strava and everybody else would see it. And it would make me feel better about myself. And like, okay, I'm doing better now. I'm getting faster. But really, I was hurting myself. And the proof of that was that within the first 4 or 5 months of running, I developed plantar fasciitis. If you don't know what it is, it means like this tightening and sensitivity of the fascia, the muscles that wrap around the bottom of the heel of the foot. And it's pretty damn painful. And so I dealt with that for a long time. In fact, it lasted over a year, I think 14 or so months. And I tried a lot of things. I went to physical therapy. I rolled a frozen water bottle under my foot. I did acupuncture. And eventually it went away. And I think one of the big reasons it did go away is that after I did a crazy amount of hard running, I got sick and had to take a number of weeks off. And so I got a lot of rest. And then also after talking to a coach, I started running more sensibly and running slower. And now that's gone. I'm no longer injured because I'm not, running these stupid paces and I'm trying to be smarter about my running. But it definitely takes a degree of faith in the process and in yourself and what's going to come down the line. So you need to set, I think, longer range goals for yourself because short-term goals are really just going to destroy your running and your body as well.
And I think a coach is especially an important tool that's sometimes overlooked by personality types like Christopher and I, where we are kind of all in, obsessive, like we get into something and we are all in both feet. And sometimes you just need to be told, no, it's okay to go slower. There's a reason for this. This is the method behind it. This is the data. This is the science. Those are the kind of things we need to see and know. Almost make it okay to go slow. You don't want to prove something that doesn't need to be proved. If you fail a run, a speed work, say on a random Wednesday on your treadmill, and then the next day you go sprinting down hills during a recovery run. Probably not the best idea. It's a random example.
And while, if you can't find a coach or if you can't afford a coach and you use a plan, I think that it can be a great guideline. But I think that it requires you then to be much more intuitive and much more focused on listening to your body. Because if you're in tune with yourself and you can get out of your own way, you'll know that, you're in pain and you're hurting yourself and you're pushing too hard. And you want to avoid those things definitely because you don't want to injure yourself. And it's one of my biggest fears as I started running was that if I get hurt, I'm going to lose a lot of training time and then I'm going to miss races. So you definitely want to stay healthy and you have to be smart about your running to do that.
And I don't think you missed any races when you got sick, but you missed a ton of training time. It was almost when you came back, starting from scratch.
Yeah, we did the Marine Corps Marathon 50K, our first ultra at the end of October. 3 weeks after the Chicago Marathon?
Yeah.
Which maybe wasn't the smartest thing. And I don't know who talked us into doing that.
Sounds like a jerk.
It really beat us up physically, both of us. And we had a hard time getting through that whole race. And then when we came back, I felt like I was sick for months, it seemed like. Like first I got RSV and then COVID and then a flu and then an upper respiratory infection. And it was like my body had just kind of given up on me. He's like, you need to take a break, buddy. And so it was sort of forced on me. And it was probably a really good thing for my running that actually that happened.
And I actually don't think the 50K would have been a terrible plan after Chicago, but the way Chris and I went about it was not the proper way. We used Chicago as a training race, but we didn't run it like a training race. We ran way too fast and we tried to go sub 4 and we crashed and burned on that. And that's not the proper way for a training run.
One of the great things about running, as opposed to, say, cycling, for example, is that you don't really need all that much to get started, just a good pair of shoes. And even though that's a simple thing, it can be overwhelming for a lot of new runners. And so what I recommend is finding yourself a local running shoe store and going in and being properly fitted for a set of shoes. Jim and I, and you'll find this out in follow-up podcasts, are kind of nuts about gear and shoes specifically. We both have way more shoes than anybody needs. But we've gotten to the point, we've gotten enough experience where I feel like it's safe for us to just order shoes online because we know what to expect from a pair of shoes. and we know what works for us and what doesn't. But for someone who's brand new to the sport, I definitely recommend going in and being fitted, and also maybe getting, maybe a couple pair of shoes or even 2 or 3, because I think it's a good idea to rotate them. And especially if you want to run in different surfaces, like Jim and I both love running trails. And so we have different shoes for that. But also, if you're going to be running pretty regularly, I think it's a good idea to take a break from one shoe and then go to your next shoe. But you also want to make sure that those fit properly. Jim, your thoughts?
So part of the reason that you want to have multiple shoes in your rotations is because no matter how great a shoe fits, every time you strike, you're going to hit the same spot and you can develop hot spots. So it's good to cycle through shoes, especially different types of shoes, for your long runs, for your tempo runs. So this is a little bit more advanced if you're just doing a 5K to begin with, that you really don't need a shoe rotation. You can usually get away with one good pair of shoes and just make sure that it's comfortable, you like it, and, realistically, too, it has to be stylish. Like, it could fit great if it's ugly. I've had some of the best shoes ever, and I don't like the way they look, so they just sit and gather dust. But it is important to get fitted. I found out through the process of getting my feet measured that I have 2 different sized feet, so it's very hard for me sometimes to find running shoes that fit properly because my one foot is half a size smaller than the other foot. And that can cause a lot of issues when you go to specific brands that are like race shoes or fit very snugly, and then you can end up losing. I'm sure most of the people listening to this podcast have seen, the missing toenail. It's not pretty, and that's usually caused by ill-fitting running shoes. So that's definitely one thing you want to look into. And the other thing that Chris kind of mentioned was just getting out there after you get fitted and running in the shoes is make sure you take advantage of those running stores. And if you order them online, the return policies. If you get something and it feels great in the running store, bouncing around and just walking around the running store, it's a completely different experience than going out there and running in it. And they have 30 to 60-day return policies because it might not work for you out on the run. You might feel great walking around in it, and then you hit, your race pace, or you get out there and start running in it, and it's just not the shoe for you. So don't feel like just because it felt good walking around on it that there's something wrong when you're running in it. It's a completely different motion, and if it doesn't work for you, it needs to go back. I've gotten stuck with a lot of shoes that felt okay in the store, especially department store shoes. I bought all of my first generation shoes from the Under Armour outlet, and a lot of those shoes felt okay walking around and just in daily wear, but those are not running shoes. And you can do a lot of damage to your body if you don't have the proper equipment when you're trying to do a high stress activity like running.
I think that's a really great point about returns, and I think a lot of people don't even realize this because, if you go to a department store and you buy shoes, if you wear them on the street, they're yours. There's no returning those. But a lot of running stores do have this policy where you can return shoes. And if you have like a premier membership at somewhere, they'll often extend that up to 90 days. And I have returned shoes a couple of months after I'd started with them and been just be like, in the end, this did not work for me. Or, if a shoe gave me blisters, it just goes right back because you don't want to have to run with that. Your feet are going to be out there churning miles for a long, long time. And you want to make sure they stay healthy and happy.
And that's part of the price of the shoe too. So definitely you're going to get sticker shock. If you just wear Kohl's $60 Adidas and then you go into a running store and you see these running shoes, there's shoes that are upwards of $250 super shoes. You don't need a super shoe, but even a daily trainer is going to run you anywhere from $125 to $150. And that's just something to think about, that maybe it's an investment that you're going to have to make in this sport that you weren't necessarily expecting. Chris said it's easy and you don't need a lot of gear, but the gear you do need tends to be a little bit more expensive than most people think. And they're, I don't need a $150 shoe to run in.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah, exactly. You're not in grade school anymore. Your body's not going to recover like it did. Your skeleton's going to hurt for weeks if you're trying to run on really cheap, flimsy department store shoes. But for that investment you're making, you do get these things like an extended return policy and things that are nice, like very high-end foams in these shoes that are meant for upwards of 350 miles and super good shock absorption and energy return. So there's a lot of science, and I'm sure we'll touch on this in later episodes because we love our running gear. But those are the kind of things that you're going to have to look for when you get a shoe is, how does this feel underfoot? How does this feel when I'm running? Am I willing to make this investment in myself?
And while we do recommend being able to get a few shoes for rotation as you get going, I would definitely put that money into one good pair of shoes if you can't afford a few. I'd much rather have one pair of $150 shoes than three pair of $50 shoes. You'll be much better off in the long run. And once you get going, then you have an excuse to buy more shoes.
You'll definitely put your marriage to the test with the running shoe collection. Hopefully your spouse or significant other is a runner as well, or at least a fan of running.
Or at least someone who just appreciates shoes.
Fair enough.
I always had the least amount of shoes in the house, and now I might have the most. Although I think it's pretty close at this point.
Although your shoes tend to be very boring. You guys will find a lot of bright, obnoxious colors when you start shopping for running shoes, which I find awesome. Chris is not so much.
Yeah, Jim is always disparaging my colorway choices. I tend to be more of a minimalist, less flamboyant runner, so my stuff is typically grays and blacks or muted earth tones. But we all have our own style choices, even if they're wrong.
I was a 90s kid. I can't help what Nickelodeon instilled in my head that slime is a cool color.
Excuse noted. Something else that a lot of people don't think that much about is how you take care of your body after runs. Even, myself, I'm actually trained as a yoga instructor, and I've done that for a number of years and have my own practice, but I can be pretty bad about taking care of my body after your run. Foam rolling is a great thing for taking care of your muscles. I also use this sort of aluminum soft scraper for getting into the calves. Doing yoga after crazy runs helps me feel a lot better. But as you get more and more involved in the sport, body maintenance is something that's going to have to be a big part of your routine just to keep you out there and to keep you healthy and safe through your runs.
I do have a lot of recovery gear, and that's kind of beyond what you need to start off. And I just recently got this stuff as I started to increase my distance, but it is super important to stretch or have some kind of shakeout after you're done. I find the best way of warming up is some kind of dynamic activity that stretches your muscles a little bit, maybe butt kicks where you're just kind of overemphasizing your running form and it's literally kicking yourself in the butt as you run. Some skipping, jump rope, anything like that where you're just kind of getting your muscles warmed up and ready to go. Worst case scenario, just run or walk at a really slow pace up and down just to get your muscles loose and some blood flowing. And then just any kind of maintenance you can do, like Chris mentioned, when you get back, where it's just a nice little stretch, or foam rollers are very inexpensive. You can get one for $25 off Amazon, I'm sure. And you just kind of roll out your muscles so that when they're healing, they're not tight and knotted. And the next day you feel terrible. So it is a good habit to get into, especially early on when your body's going to be trying to figure out what you're doing to it to get that recovery process started. And it's just a good habit to form along with your running, that if I run, I need to recover so that you're not trying to throw it in down the road like I did. And now I'm trying to play catch up after the fact.
Exactly. Because when we're out there and we're running, we are actually damaging our bodies. We're tearing muscle fibers and we're shredding ourselves and doing damage. And so we need to recover from that. And one of the best ways to promote recovery in the body is to promote blood flow. And foam rolling does that. I know that oftentimes in the afternoons or evenings, you and Carolyn go for a walk. And I'm sure that that's really beneficial to keeping the blood flowing. And so it's something that you always need to be mindful of and to make time for in your schedule. Know that beyond just making time to do your training runs, you also need to make time to do this body maintenance to keep yourself safe and free of injury.
And not to scare anyone off running, because this is any physical activity, you are tearing muscle fibers and putting stress on your body. But the good is always going to outweigh the bad for physical activity. But I was told somewhere that the motion is the lotion. So it is great to go for a walk or do any kind of gentle activity, maybe even cycling, swimming, things like that, where you're not necessarily load-bearing activities are great for recovery days or cross-training or just getting some blood flowing back in those legs after you've pounded them for a 5K race or any kind of extended distance.
Yeah, when I finished my first marathon, I went up there with a couple ladies from the local run club, Nicole and Maria. And one of the things they said as soon as we'd finished, and it was my first marathon, and they were veterans, was that it'd be a great idea to go out and do a walk. And so they did, and I was laid in bed wishing my life was over. But they did that, and I think it benefited them quite a bit. I will say that once I got through a little nap and managed to stumble out of my bunk and got into a shower, that was the best shower of my life. There's something about getting into a hot shower after a hard race that really makes you feel like a brand new person. And if you can get out for dinner after that. It's really important to eat right after a run and refuel the body because it's going to take a lot of energy and protein and carbohydrates to begin that rebuilding process.
And I know we're talking a lot about marathon distances and longer races because that's what's fresh in our memory and our most recent experiences. But even at a beginner stage, it's really easy, especially on the weekend, just to do your run and be like, well, I did my run. I'm done for the day. And it's really hard to get in that habit of, no, I gotta do some recovery. I'm going to go for a walk tonight and take the dogs, or just walk around the block and clear my head just to get the blood flowing back in your legs. And it's so easy just to be like, I did my part. I'm done for today. So it's a hard habit to break, but recovery is a super important tool as you begin running, just so that you're not in constant state of pain and you don't hate the sport because you're hurt so often, which I think would have been an easy thing for Chris to get into after his first year of running, just to kind of turn negative on the sport. This is supposed to be so good for me. My feet constantly hurt. I'm constantly getting sick. I feel beat up, just to turn and why am I doing this? But instead, you kind of looked inwards. And I think that's part of this podcast and why we wanted to get it started, was just so people don't have make those same mistakes that we kind of both made in our early days of running, where it was just so easy to, well, this isn't right. This, and there's so much misinformation out there when you try to get running, and so many dissenting voices. So we kind of wanted to just take a look at this from an ordinary runner's point of view. And we both have different experience levels, but we both made a lot of the same mistakes. And we could have gone down paths where we turned on running and just walked away from the sport altogether. But I think Chris would agree that it brings a lot of happiness and joy into our lives. And we feel that the good outweighs the bad, even on those days where we hurt really bad.
Yeah, when we finished really rough races or we had tough training runs and we both were kind of hating it, and maybe we were sort of joking about the idea of quitting, I would sort of dig into myself and think about what running has done for me. And even just over the last couple of years, and I look back and I think about who I am and how it's changed me, I just like who I am as a runner better than who I was before. And so that's my biggest motivation, is I want to keep being this person. And if running gets me there, then, that's my tool. Also, it's something that I do actually really enjoy. It's funny, when I started, I went out and I hated the first run, and then I hated the next run, and I think I hated the next 5 runs. But then after that, I might have only hated half of the run I was doing. But it wasn't that much longer before I didn't hate any of what I was doing. It would be hard and it would be uncomfortable and physically taxing, certainly a lot of the times. But I really do enjoy myself when I'm out there. And nowadays I am doing some training runs on the treadmill. But when I get out there and I'm on the road and I'm out, in sort of nice neighborhoods that have a lot of natural environment, and there are fields and trees and deer bounding by, I feel like I've just sort of reconnected with the world and nature. And that brings a lot of peace and happiness to my life.
So with that, I think we'll move into our gear recommendation for this week. I think it seems fitting that since we were just talking about it, we'll go with shoes first. My go-to shoe is the Nike Zoom X Invincible. They are on the 3rd iteration right now. It is one of the most comfortable shoes I've ever worn since I started running. It's what I ran my 50K road race in, and I really recommend this shoe, especially for bigger runners. If you have a bigger frame, maybe you're a little bit heavier of a runner, this is an awesome shoe that has a lot of give to it. It still has a little bit of a rocker. It has great grip on the outside, so the outsole is really good in like less than ideal conditions, like you got a little rain or maybe the streets are a little frosty. And then it's got the Zoom X foam, which for those of you who don't know is Nike's top end foam. It's a very supercritical foam, but it has a lot of forgiveness and squish to it, but it also has a lot of rebound. So the energy that you're putting in, you do get a lot of it back out, but it's not a brutal shoe with a carbon fiber plate or anything like that, which I'm sure we'll be talking about down the road somewhere. But I think this is a great shoe for beginners. It's a little bit of a sticker shock at $180, but you can definitely find deals on this on the Nike website or even at Dick's Sporting Goods. And it's a great place that you can go and try these shoes on because they do have them readily available at Dick's. So you can go try it on, see how it feels. But I would definitely recommend this. It's a great beginner shoe, or even somebody who's running crazy miles at this point. What are you thinking for shoes, Chris?
I was just thinking about a couple of daily trainers that I've liked throughout my history. And the first one I started off with was the Asics Gel Nimbus. And that supported me really well, kept my feet feeling pretty good. It's a pretty basic shoe, and it's a great everyday trainer, and it gets you through what you need to do. And I've run a few races in it and performed pretty well for that. Lately, I'm also liking Saucony's Endorphin Shift, and that's pretty much my everyday trainer nowadays. And I feel like they're fairly interchangeable. They're both a little bit heavy. They have more in the uppers than, say, our super shoes do. So on warmer days, they might feel a little bit hot on the feet, and definitely heavier than super shoes. And while they don't have like the rebound of something with a plate, they do have a fair amount of nice cushioning, so it keeps the feet feeling pretty fresh. So I recommend both of those shoes for anyone to try out. I think that when you go into a store, it's all really going to come down to personal preference. The first few times that I went in to be fitted, I would try out 3 to 5 pair of shoes, and you will be surprised at how dramatically different they can feel on your feet, and what works great for someone else might not be working that well for you. And then once usually I get down to like 2 pairs that I like, I'll put 1 on each foot and then really see what the differences are like. So those are ways that I recommend trying out shoes as you get going.
And just to touch base on what you just said with the trying on multiple shoes in a running store, 9 out of 10 people that I've recommended shoes for will go in a running store and try on Brooks Ghost and think that they were the best shoes they've ever worn, and that Saucony's feel super weird. But once you get running in it, it's a whole different experience. And I just wanted to mention that because that's why that return policy is so important. It might feel great just bouncing up and down in the store, but once you get going, you might want a different type of foam or a different type of underfoot feel. And it's different for everybody. So we just recommend what works for us, but everybody's a little bit different. And I know the Invincible didn't work for Chris. It's my GOAT shoe right now. I do like the Endorphin Shift. I would definitely give that a thumbs up. But Asus doesn't seem to work for me at all. I got the newest Nimbus and it was a nightmare. So just to go to show that not everybody has the same kind of foot or underfoot want feel. So definitely keep in mind that this is a personalized thing that you're going to have to get the feel for. But I think those are 2 really good starting points, especially for beginner shoes. With that, we're going to move into what we have coming up this weekend. Chris, I don't think you have anything exciting, just a really long training run.
Yeah, 20 mile, which I'm really looking forward to. And it's going to be damn cold in Chicago. A low of, I think, 18, high of 28, maybe.
That sounds right. Yep. Nice and frosty. I tried to talk Chris into running my trail race with me. I got a half marathon trail race this weekend on Saturday. It's going to be a lot of single track, a little bit more challenging than what you usually get in the Chicagoland area, but I'm really looking forward to it. As Chris mentioned earlier in the podcast, we really love running trails. So anytime that there's a local trail race nearby, I try to get signed up for that. I'll definitely have a race recap for episode 2 here. Let you know how everything went. I'm not looking to PR. It's just going to be a fun race and running it at training paces or, conversational paces.
Nice. I think that brings us around to just about wrapping up this episode. It's, as we said, our very first, so we'd love to hear what you guys think about it. We'll put some information in the show notes with links to specific shoes that we talked about and any other thoughts that come up afterwards.
I've been told it's important to rate this 5 stars. So if you guys could do that, please, on Apple Podcasts, that would be super helpful.
Or any other podcasting platform that you might prefer.
I just love 5 stars.
That's it for this time. Thanks for listening. I'm Chris.
I'm Jim.
Later.